You ever watch a comedian of yesteryear wallow in trivial perpetuity, with the only distinguishing effort they ever put into their hollow existence is to reassure themselves by convincing others of their enduring relevance?
This is a day in the life of a childless woman. I wake up at 6 a.m. I remember that I have no kids to take to school, so I take an edible, masturbate, and go back to sleep.
The irony in the backlash they receive is, by disparaging valid detractors, that's the only time they're ever brought up in conversation.
Lately, I've been loud and proud about my status as a single, unmarried, childless, wild woman. And apparently some men cannot handle that. If you need daily alpha content to remind you to be alpha, you might not be an alpha. Take it from an alpha. I'll tell you what's wrong with that. Nothing.
Despite their insistence that they've got their fingers on the pulse of pop culture, reality reflects them showing their age.
The weightlessness of my existence has granted me superhuman powers.
Underscores how out of touch they've grown.
Anyway, I have to go because my single, unmarried is about to perform at my sold-out comedy show. I'd invite you, but there are no tickets left. Bye.
How their comedy has grown stale.
I invent a time machine, go back in time, and kill Hitler. Freeze, you bastard! It's amazing what you can do when you have this much free time.
Not to mention their use of social media to voice their politics instead of their stand-up routine.
I usually don't do things like this, but when I have to listen to men talk like that, I have no choice but to sedate myself with drugs and alcohol. No, best of luck to you, honey.
Because if you have to try that hard at confidence, you've already arrived. Fake it till you break hips. Chelsea Handler, everybody. Aging like box wine.
There's nothing more pathetic than an aging hipster.
Apropos then, that I could just as easily be referencing the Scream franchise, and the latest sequel it's pinched out since last year's masterclass in filming. Much like my Annabelle response episode, this won't be a full review, more... Did I just call it Annabelle instead of Megan? I can't believe how often that happens. I'm keeping that slip up in. Just goes to show the impression that movie had on me. Just like my Methrigan post-mortem, this reaction video on Scream 6 will be my quick-fire thoughts on this franchise backfire. Think of this edition as more of a rundown than a review. New York, new rules. Translation, the same rules apply. Straight up, I want to make it clear, I've always held the genre, its handlers, studios, and the entertainment media complex to a high standard, and that only has to include myself, but it starts with me. For the record, at the end of my Scream 4 watch party, I made a list of predictions for Scream 6 and nailed it 54% of the time. Not a great batting average, admittedly. I don't know if the writers took the formulaic opening of the phone call from the killer and repackaged it as a girl waiting in a restaurant for her mystery one-night stand as some kind of commentary on dating apps and hookup culture, but this was anything but clever. This bimbo is so easily led astray, you get the impression that you could steer her into open traffic if you strung a pair of yoga pants to the end of a fishing lure. Like the lamb to the slaughter, she'll miss every red flag and warning sign as she's Pied Piper to her demise. You tell me if you're seeing red. Here I am thinking I'm watching the latest exercise in Studio Greed with the Chronicles of the Ghostface Killer, not an episode of The Tinder Swindler. I can see the headline now. Streetwalker sideswiped by the Catfish Killer. Hashtag never swipe left. This caricature brought to you by Bumble. Make the first move.
I dare you.
Where are my manners? All this talk of strumpets and promotion reminds me what a floozy I am. Take it away, sponsors. Think of the power to tune out the whole world placed in your hands. Now think again, because Jabra Headsets puts that power in your ears. Listen closely. From workout earbuds to Bluetooth music headsets and office hearing devices. So, if other brands play your music sounding like a broken record, march to the beat of a different tune with Jabra. If you're an HD snob like me, you probably buy Samsung for all your major electronics. Catch up on your favorite horror classics on one of their Ultra HD TVs. Watch one of Scream Factory's Blu-rays on their 4K players. Keep up with updates from 80s horror documentary In Search of Darkness on a high-end tablet. Subscribe to your favorite YouTuber through one of their Galaxy phones. I have so many Samsung devices, I've always thought they should be paying me. Well, now they can, and you can help. If you use the link in the description for either Samsung or Jabra purchases, it'll help the channel out tremendously. With the promotional considerations accounted for, it's on with the show. How appropriate that the movie starts with a dinner date, because this opening is just an hors d'oeuvre of the crap souffle on display. If you think the restaurant service was bad, wait until you see what's waiting for you in the fridge. Speaking of spoiled remains, that nicely brings me to the cast. It was nice of the writers to go through the trouble of resurrecting the Kirby character from Scream 4, considering she's so utterly wasted as a fan favorite in Part 6. They don't introduce any new characters because writing is hard, and honestly, why bother making their own memorable characters if they can just resort to playing with other people's toys? Now, what about those leftovers from last year's sequel? The Randy stand-in isn't just the only noteworthy contribution that the franchise gatekeepers have made, but amounts to an obnoxious self-insert for the writers. The best characters serve as entry points to ease your audience into the established world. This vacuous dullard operates on opposite and simply serves as a mouthpiece for the screenwriters to forcibly subject their worldview on us. Not only does she drone on with the same meta talking points that we've seen 5 times before for the last 27 years, which the writers swear is so hip and counterculture, but even other characters audibly groan when she starts to harangue both co-stars and audience members.
Oh, and that's not even the worst part.
This is the part where she tells us the worst part.
The worst part is...
Aren't the monologues saved for the villains? Worse than her self-aware narrations on the state of cinema is how painfully unfunny she is. If you're gonna fail at delivering in the memorable scary movie survivor department, do you mind refraining from committing crimes against comedy? This series is so hopelessly rudderless that by inadvertently devoting more investment into its number 3 character, she is not only the most outstanding addition to these sequels, sticking out more than either of the actual 2 leads, but she stands out in the worst ways possible. Little Richard, whose name I don't care enough to remember, is the most annoying person ever added to this franchise.
Candyman, the original or Requiem?
Both. Game recognized game.
Game recognizes game.
Movies, stop trying to be hip-hop stars. It's cringe, you're not men, and you'll notice that the males that you're desperately trying to emulate don't even talk like that. Your comic relief, bereft of a punchline, is about as useless as a dumb blonde stereotype with a gender studies degree. I'll have none of that. This pretentious cardboard cutout isn't the stand-up comic this franchise swears that she is. She's an open micer at best who fills up that awkward silence of a dead crowd by relying on yo mama jokes and heckling people's spouses.
Wow, dude.
Yeah.
It was a G.I. Jane jump.
While not as myth-breaking as Halloween Kills, this movie absolutely is the Last Jedi of the series. It's an entirely pointless sequel in the same vein as Jurassic World Fallen box office that promises it's taking chances, but really it's just drenching its script in fluff. Take, for example, the breadcrumb of masks worn by all the previous killers was itself a red herring in a film that overly relied on red herrings. But we do get the Ghostface Museum because the last two movies sure paved the way forward by exploiting its past. While Morgan Freeman does the cliched exposition dump, she makes two flagrant statements. Firstly, that what we're dealing with here appears to be a case of the rules of a film franchise.
We're in a franchise, and there are certain rules to a continuing franchise. I had a feeling.
Hold up. Hey.
The rules of each film in the collection are as follows. OG Scream stated the rules of a scary movie. Part 2, the rules of a sequel. Part 3, a trilogy. 4, a remake. 5, a requel. And Part 6, the rules of a franchise? What type of shallow trash is that? You know you've hit the skids when you're not just recycling tired ideas, but you're so bereft of identity that your sixth entry can only identify as a franchise, which your series has already been for the better half of 4 sequels?
Brilliant! Brilliant!
Secondly, Fish Lips lies out of her flat ass when Lady Lesbos makes proclamation that, according to said rules of the franchise, anyone can die.
Which means main characters are completely expendable now too. Any of us could go at any time, especially Sam and Tara.
Guys, not only was this the same lame statement made in the previous sequel, you be sure to do Inkarnate a favor. Bear that statement in mind for the end of this video. For the record, they've tried the college years take on the franchise as its second installment twice in this franchise. You know what other dead-end shake-up the Scream series has attempted and failed at? Moving the story out of Woodsboro. Can we just admit that when you try to shift the genre from a high school-centric plot and pigeonhole it into university lifestyle, it just doesn't work? They tried it with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, The Vampire Diaries, etc., etc. If Michael Myers was in a retirement home for the criminally insane, Ghostface has reached Van Wilder levels of cringe as the elder frat boy who arrived fashionably late in the mid-90s, but almost 30 years later clung to the party scene a bit too long.
There's nothing more pathetic than an aging hipster.
It's one thing if your movie starts out at Ivy League. Candyman and the Black Xmas remake started off in college. But the Scream series is just grasping at straws by this point. Any excuse to keep this train on the tracks? Seriously, for a franchise whose subgenre attempted CW11 melodrama and actors, they've reached CW levels of writing and acting. To that point, it's painfully obvious to see that this series has preoccupied our time and its efforts with being trendy rather than in delivering a suspenseful plot or telling a gripping story. Having said that, let it not be said that Inkarnate does not give credit where it's due. This sequel went up against some stiff competition, even knocking off Creed in its first week. See what happens when a series continues without its leading star? It also managed to reach and cross the $100 million mark. Praise aside, if they insist in doggedly adhering to the whodunit formula, is it really that big of an ask that they at least make the killer reveal and subsequent motivation mean something? Instead, it just all falls flat. Ghostface's identity is as lackluster as the motive. I think back to the first Scream film, over the betrayal of the villain's reveal and how that shock value only deepened once the motive was explained. Don't try and tell me I can't compare Part 6 to past films, because child, please, all these sequels do now is reference the past franchise. After the killer is unmasked, their acting is so hammy and over the top, I'm left scratching my head asking myself, does this person know they're supposed to be the menacing bad guy and not the butt of a joke?
Yeah, you're gonna love this one. It's a Scream, baby.
Arguably worse than how ineffectual the killer has become, my biggest gripe with the last two films is what they're doing to the fear factor. Do you even understand the futility of a horror movie where death means nothing? They bring back Billy Loomis as a Dexter ghost. They suggest Stu Macher is still alive. They resurrect Kirby 2 sequels later, and hoodwink the audience into believing that one of the characters in this film is actually murdered. All of this, and that's not even including the gratuitous gouging the movie delights in. Stab wounds mean nothing. When any character gets gutted like a fish, the movie basically treats it as purely optional whether these characters should die. We're way past plot armor by this point. Mortality is based purely on the writer's discretion, not if it serves the plot, serves as a payoff, or the severing of major arteries and organs. No, we can't be bothered with that. A total of 4 main characters get skewered, and the movie shrugs off these impalements like they're minor abrasions. Well, break out the standard harpoon band-aids and crucifixion ointment.
It makes perfect Requel sense.
For a franchise that served as a litmus test for horror, it's instead made a mockery of death itself. Not a good look. Instead of instilling in your audience that anyone can die at any given moment, your viewers are instead conditioned to ask, what would it matter if you're just going to reverse it anyway?
To show that this wasn't just some cash-in, run-of-the-mill sequel.
Boring.
I've seen this movie before. You really need some new material.
Because our movie has stakes! Because anyone can die in a Requel.
You might actually be the most derivative one of all.
Hey, remember those high stakes that this very film put on its own shoulders?
And rule 3, no one is safe.
Wait, any of us?
Well, guess what?
Oh my god, we all survived. It's a twist and a twist. I gave you a lot of drops, by the way.
What a slap in the face to your audience. I swear, they hand out these empty promises like it's Halloween candy.
Do you not remember how these movies work?
Look, this movie doesn't take any risks because it doesn't know what those imply and thus can't deliver any implications, even after 2 sequels. They promise game changers, they supply status quo. They sure do pop off at the mouth over how trigger happy they are, considering their results validate their gun shy. What more proof do you need over how counterfeit their risk-taking is than their continued dependency on the first film? I mean, for God's sakes, they build an entire shrine to past films this time around. After 2 films in 1 year and a third on the way, if the Scream franchise were really on a roll, why would there already be talk of slowing its momentum, unless that momentum is just a mirage? If they're so deep into this franchise that they now have dual trilogies, why don't they grow some balls, take an actual risk, and set the sequel in space the way we all want? I've been Inkarnate reminding you, I ain't just a big deal, I'm the real deal. If you're resigned to your fate, time to subscribe to your fears.